there, welcome back to Mama's Orchids and Backyard. In this video, I'm going to share my experience with rooting and growing Chayote. I'm so excited about this. This is my first year growing Chayote and it's probably my favorite squash. I'm going to go through the steps to rooting the Chayote from fruit and growing it. And I call the fruit the actual squash. Okay, the first step is to choose the right Chayote. Choose a plump, round, large, and heavy, not dehydrated fruit. This indicates that the fruit is matured and well developed so that the seed inside is also well developed and will be a good candidate for successful rooting. I start this about 3 months before spring, or before when my ground reaches about 60 degrees Fahrenheit to transplant in the ground, because this Chayote is very sensitive to the cold. So I had to make sure that the timing was just right. The second step is to root the Chayote in water. Place the Chayote in a bowl of water and place it in a very bright window. Exposed to full sun is even better. Use a clear glass bowl is also better. It lets the light pass to the seed. Depending on how mature the fruit is, the seed inside can take a week to 3 weeks to germinate or sprout out. Freshen up the water by changing the water every few days. And if it doesn't germinate in 2 weeks, the room might be too cold. So maybe use a heating mat at the lowest setting. This could increase germination drastically. The third step is removing the fruit from the seedling. Once the roots have grown to about 1 inch long, gently remove the fruit from the seedling. As you can see, I let this one go too long before removing the fruit on this first Chayote. You can also skip this step if you want to plant the entire fruit with the seedling attached in a pot of potting soil. I prefer to remove the fruit just to reduce the risk of rotting the seedling. Well, and I also just want to eat the squash instead of throwing it away. So since the seedling has roots, it will get its nutrient from the soil, so it doesn't need the fruit portion anymore. When I was removing the seedling, I was trying to be careful not to damage the meristem tip, which is at the very end of the wrinkled part, the wider part of the squash, where the roots will appear. Otherwise, it's not critical to get the entire endosperm. As you can see, I have cut into the 2 halves, that is the endosperm part. This is another food source for the embryo. The cotyledon leaves come from the joint where the narrow part of the 2 halves are held together. So it's really critical not to damage this portion or the leaves won't come out. Chayotes have dicot type of seeds, so we can expect 2 leaves sprouting out. So now you have a really fragile seedling. The fourth part is to plant the seedling into potting soil and add a little bit amount of slow release fertilizer. I used MicroLife. Make sure you use a small 4-inch pot so that the seedling can dry out in between watering. Otherwise, you risk rotting the seedling. And we can transplant to a larger pot as the roots become more established in about 2 to 3 weeks. For now, we can just pot the root portions and keep the endosperm portion in the open to sprout the 2 first leaves. If you lightly bury the endosperm, that's okay. The plant will find its way out of in the bright light, so it should be fine. Keep the seedling in the brightest light you can find in your home. All right, the next step is more fun because now you have a really fair sized plant. The next step is number 5, transplant to a bigger pot and stake the plant. So when the roots were well established and the plant is outgrowing this 4-inch pot, it was time for me to move the plant to a larger 1-gallon size pot for the rest of the winter. And I used 4 long stakes, about 3 foot long each, to stake up the plant. Long, slender tree branches work too. And then I also kept trimming the plant if it got too long and dangly. And I definitely trimmed off all the flowers when I saw them coming out, because we don't want the plant to start producing fruits just yet. We want it to wait until it's ready to transplant outside. All right, step number 6, planting outdoor. So when it's warmer than about 60 consistently, plant this Chayote outdoors. Be sure you are past the last frost date, because once you unravel the plant and place it in the ground, it can be a big plant and hard to cover if it does starts to freeze. I had to actually dig up my plant and bring it in. Yep. I was too quick to the draw and prematurely planted my Chayote plant outdoors. So I ended up unpotting mine from the large terracotta pot, and then I brought it into the into a smaller 1-gallon pot and brought it into the shed. So the cold lingered this year, and it was just unexpected. It was work to get this plant back in. Okay, and then number 7 would be trim the vines to keep it tidy. Once the plant is established in the ground or in a big giant pot, as I have in mine, keep about 3 main branch, and then each of those branch will give more branches, and so you have to maintain however many you can manage for the space that you're growing it in, as well as how much water and fertilizer you're willing to give the plant. Okay, step number 8 is watering. So I water twice a day if necessary, which I have been lately. My spring has gotten so hot in the 90s. And I fertilize once a week or every other week sometimes. In my Texas heat, I have to water twice, and the plant will shrivel. I also feed it weekly in with my homemade fertilizer, and sometimes I supplement with a little bit of Miracle-Gro fertilizer. And number 9, it's a really important step. Pollinate the female flowers with a male flower. The female flower has a tiny Chayote fruit attached to it, whereas the male flower doesn't. And I have some pictures here as an example to show you. I would hand pollinate it in the morning. It's when the blooms will open. Hand pollinating would ensure that the female fruit will sustain. Otherwise, if it doesn't get pollinated, it will dry up and just fall off. And the male flower bloom is a little tiny, and it's hard to handle, so you could use a toothpick to do it, to pollinate, or a paintbrush. Okay, number 10 is harvest the Chayote when they're young. This will encourage more to grow. If the fruit matures on the vine too long, then the plant will think that it's done and it doesn't need to put out more fruits. And besides, younger squash tastes better, right? And I love eating these Chayotes when they're young. They have this sweet, crunchy taste to it. Well, I hope you try growing some Chayotes next summer. It's too late this summer, of course. And good luck and happy growing. Thanks. Bye-bye.